In terms of that Indo-Pacific partnership that you mentioned, as well as that and the joint statement that you made with President Biden, are we reaching a point where we're going to have to choose between our relationships between the US and China?
No. And look, independent foreign policy for New Zealand has been one of our foundation principles for an extremely long time, and regardless of who's in government at any time. And it's served us well. It means that we make a judgment about our individual position on issues based on what meets our values and our interests. And so it's never been about picking sides. It's about focusing on the values that we have. Yes, at any given time, there may be more alignment with some countries than others. And at any given time, there might be areas where you have strong disagreements with others. For us, it's about always making sure that we're standing proudly on our own 2 feet and letting those views be known.
Although, given what is going on in the Pacific at the moment, is our relationship with China strained?
Well, look, it's fair to say that there have been issues on which we've disagreed for some time. But we've always made that known. And so, for instance, in recent times, none of our positions will be a surprise to China because we've been really consistent on our positions on a number of issues. The militarisation of the Pacific, human rights issues, they're clear on where we stand. What I would just reflect for the Pacific has had a relationship with China for years. So it's not new that a relationship exists. What we're being cautious about is, as a region, if it's starting to dip into the space of defence or security, we should talk about that as a region. And you'll see with the recent visit from China, China, it hasn't dipped into that space. And so let's just acknowledge the sovereignty of these Pacific nations to make their decisions as well on their terms.
Yeah, true, but a lot of people are concerned about about that influence that China is having in the Pacific. Are we doing enough to support the Pacific the way that we should be doing that, or have we fallen asleep at the wheel a little bit?
3 biggest ODA, overseas aid and development spend in the Pacific is Australia, New Zealand and Japan. So we have been a significant presence for years and will continue to be. And in fact, for this term, we've increased our spending in the Pacific by 45%, and that's because of the climate need in the region. And if you ask the Pacific, as we do often, what is your #1 priority? They'll say it's climate change. So we're there on their terms, working alongside them. And the nature of our relationship really matters because we are of the Pacific, and that's where we will always be different than some of the other relationships that you see in our region.
Although, are we there as much as we need to be? I mean, Penny Wong, the Australian foreign minister, went there twice in 2 weeks, and Anaya Mahuta has not been there yet.
Maddie, we have had 100 ministerial engagements or formal engagements with our Pacific Island partners over this even short period of time, all the way through COVID. Now, there's only a handful of places that we can actually visit where we won't be asking them to create exemptions for their COVID border controls right now, which is why we've respected that. We've used online methods to talk and engage with one another. But I'm in frequent contact with my counterparts. Minister Mahuta is too. The measure of a relationship is not when you last arrived at the airport. That is not the nature of our relationships. They run so much deeper than that.
You might not have seen this research yet, but a new study indicates that there's a 42% chance that climate warming of at least 1.5 degrees Celsius is already baked in. We had a guest on just before you speaking about the fact that although we may be putting processes in place, we're not acting fast enough. Do you believe that we are acting with urgency?
Yeah, I do. We've put into our laws that everything that we do as a nation and as a government has to be focused on that 1.5 degree threshold. You will have seen that just recently we released our emissions reduction plan to meet the carbon budgets that are being set for us by the Climate Commission. So we've created a process now to make sure that regardless of who is in government, we have the goals we need all set and that independent voice in setting them and a plan to get there. And we have a plan to get there. Now it's about moving as quickly as we can. One of the issues is we cannot postpone this activity because you know that it takes, even starting now, we don't see the benefit for some time, which is why it's so important that we keep up that investment and that change, not just government, but the private sector as well.
Prime Minister, thank you so much for joining us. It's really nice to see you back here as well after
nice to see you. Sorry about my earpiece issues.
Yes, no, thank you for dealing with the earpiece as well. That's Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern.
As with the recent visit from China, it hasn't dipped into that space. And so let's just acknowledge the sovereignty of these Pacific nations to make their decisions as well on their terms.
Yeah, true, but a lot of people are concerned about that influence that China is having in the Pacific. Are we doing enough